The scream didn't sound human. But it didn't sound entirely animal either. It was sharp and wet, desperate, as if the river itself had come alive and decided to scream. Amora Hale had her camera halfway raised when she heard it, and in less than 2 seconds, she was running. She didn't think. She dropped the lens, let it swing from the strap, boots hammering into the soaked red mud along the Mara's edge. That scream again, shriller this time. Then she saw it, a lion cub, flailing helplessly in the torrent. No more than 4 months old, just a splash of golden fur vanishing beneath brown water. The Mara River, swollen from last night's rains, was angry and it wanted something to drown. Without pausing, Amora dove. The water was colder than it should have been. It punched the air from her lungs. The current didn't just pull, it dragged, like hands around her ankles. She kicked hard, eyes burning as she fought her way to the cub. There! A flash of fur, 2 wide eyes, a tiny paw reaching for anything. She got one hand around it. The cub latched onto her like a vice, claws digging deep into her shoulder. She winced but didn't let go. Her other arm clawed through the current, pulling them both toward a tangled bend in the riverbank. A submerged branch slammed into her ribs. Pain exploded in her side, and for a second she lost air, her vision blacking at the edges. Not now. Not here. She wrapped both arms around the cub, teeth clenched, and drove herself upward. She didn't know how long it took. Maybe 2 minutes. Maybe 10. By the time she stumbled into the muddy shallows, gasping, every muscle in her body felt torn. The cub was still clinging to her chest, soaked and shaking, making soft, breathy chirps. And then she saw them. She froze. At the top of the slope, maybe 10 yards away, stood 5 lionesses, their golden coats slick from the earlier rain, eyes fixed on her like living statues. Not blinking. Not breathing. And behind them, massive, still as stone, stood a male lion. Thick mane. Darker than the others. Almost black. Amora felt the ground tilt under her feet. The river was behind her. The lions were ahead. And in her arms, their cub. Her legs wouldn't move. Her camera was gone. Her breath was shallow. And her body screamed at her not to make a sound. One of the lionesses stepped forward. Amora didn't breathe. Couldn't. The lioness moved slowly, deliberately, not stalking, not charging. Just walking. But every step sent a fresh jolt of panic into Amora's spine. The cub in her arms let out a weak mew, then another. Its body trembled, then went still, ears twitching toward the approaching lioness. She's the mother, Amora realized. She didn't know how she knew, she just did. There was something in the way the lioness held herself, the way her shoulders rose, every muscle focused but held in check. Her eyes, bright and gold and so painfully aware, were locked not on the cub but on Amora. Amora tried to speak. Nothing came. The lioness came closer. 10 feet. 6. Then 3. The space between them could have been the entire Mara. Amora dropped her gaze, not in fear, not exactly. It was instinct. Respect. Something older than fear. The lioness stopped. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Woman and predator. Mud-covered photographer and bloodline matriarch. Both breathing hard, both soaked and silent. And then the lioness did something Amora would never forget. She lowered her head. Not all the way. Not submissive. But low enough that it broke the ancient script, that invisible law between hunter and human. It wasn't threat. It wasn't warning. It was something else. Recognition. The cub whimpered and stretched toward her. Amora, unsure why her hands weren't shaking more, gently eased the small body forward. The lioness leaned in and, with aching gentleness, took the cub by the scruff. She didn't retreat right away. She stood there, still in the water, her face inches from Amora's, holding her cub. And then, so close Amora could feel the warmth of her breath, the lioness gave a low, breathy chuff. It vibrated through the air like thunder muffled in cotton. Amora blinked. That sound, she'd heard it before. Years ago, in a rescue center. It was what mothers made when they were calming their young. A reassurance. A thank you. The lioness turned and padded back toward the others, cub hanging gently from her jaws. No one moved. The rest of the pride just stood there, watching Amora, unreadable. The male lion hadn't shifted an inch. Then something shifted. The second lioness, younger, leaner, took a few steps forward and stopped beside the matriarch. She Saturday. Then another joined her. And another. They formed a rough semicircle, framing the moment like living statues around a sacred ritual. Amora was still kneeling in the water, heart pounding, limbs heavy with fatigue, when the male lion, massive and terrifying, finally moved. He stepped down from the rise and came toward her, each footfall silent despite his size. He passed the lionesses without pause, then stopped a mere 5 feet from where Amora still knelt. His eyes met hers. He didn't blink. He didn't growl. He bowed his head. Amora felt tears sting her eyes, absurd and unexpected. She didn't know why, but it was as if something enormous, something cosmic, had just passed through her. She wasn't prey. She wasn't a threat. In that moment, she was something else entirely. A guest. A savior. Maybe even something sacred. And when the male lifted his head again, he gave a single, deep, rumbling exhale. Not challenge. Respect. Amora's legs finally gave out. She sat hard in the shallows, mud sucking at her boots as the river lapped at her waist. Her breaths came sharp, ragged, but she couldn't take her eyes off the pride, not now, not after what had just happened. The male lion turned, slow and unhurried, and walked back toward the others. The lionesses shifted around the matriarch and the cub, creating a loose, instinctive perimeter. But none of them looked hostile. No growls. No bristling tails. Just awareness. And acceptance. Amora wiped at her eyes, though she wasn't sure if it was river water or tears clouding her vision. Her shoulder throbbed where the cub's claws had dug in, and her ribs ached with every breath from the collision with the submerged branch. But none of it mattered. She had witnessed something impossible. No, not impossible. Undeniable. She started to rise slowly, not wanting to spook them, when she heard a soft sound behind her. A breath. Grass shifting. She froze. To her right, 2 lionesses had flanked her. One sat beside a flat rock, tail twitching lazily, watching her with quiet interest. The other was closer, too close, standing just a meter away. Amora swallowed hard. They're not threatening you. They're surrounding you. Protecting you. It didn't make sense. But she felt it. Her instincts, once screaming, had gone strangely quiet, replaced by something deeper. A calm. An ancient, buried awareness. She was no longer just in the Mara. She was inside the pride. The matriarch chuffed again. Amora turned to look. The cub was now nestled between 2 lionesses, being groomed with long, slow strokes of a tongue rough as sandpaper. It looked tiny between them, but safe. Its eyes flicked to Amora for only a second, then closed. And then came the moment she never could have predicted. The matriarch walked back toward her. Alone. Amora knelt again without thinking, hands limp at her sides, fingers curling into the wet earth. The lioness stopped directly in front of her. Time froze. The rain had returned, light, misty, and it whispered through the acacia trees, brushing the earth with silver. The matriarch lowered her head. And touched her forehead to Amora's. Not roughly. Not like a warning. But gently. With purpose. Amora inhaled sharply, every nerve in her body alight. The lioness's warmth radiated into her skin, her breath hot and steady, her eyes closed. It lasted only seconds. But those seconds stretched wider than years. When the lioness pulled back, Amora felt the absence like a missing heartbeat. She didn't move. The matriarch gave a final chuff, quieter this time, then returned to her pride, and laid beside her cub. Amora sat in the silence that followed, staring into the trees, the river behind her still roaring like a god. She had crossed a boundary that wasn't supposed to exist. She hadn't just saved a life. She had been seen, accepted, by the wild, by them. The drizzle thickened, turning the air soft and heavy, but Amora barely noticed. She was still kneeling in the muck, clothes soaked through, hair stuck to her cheeks, the river humming behind her like distant applause. Her entire world had narrowed to the 6 lions stretched out before her, powerful, primal, and impossibly calm. She knew she should back away. Move slowly. Return to her equipment. But her body didn't respond. Not yet. Not when her heart was still caught in the moment, the weight of that forehead touch, the breath of the lioness still warm on her skin. Then, almost on cue, the male lion stood. He didn't roar. He didn't pace. He simply turned his massive head toward the trees, toward the camera bag she'd dropped in the panic, and let out a low, guttural sound that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a call. The rest of the pride rose with him. And to Amora's stunned disbelief, they began to form lines. 2 lionesses on either side of her. One behind, near the river's edge. The male and the matriarch positioned themselves forward, flanking a clear, unmistakable path. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't instinct. It was ceremony. Her escort. Amora blinked. "You can't be serious," she whispered under her breath, even as her legs moved, almost mechanically, obeying a pull older than thought. She took 1 step forward. No reaction. Another. Still nothing. She was walking the gauntlet, but not in fear, not under threat. She was being guided, the way a guest is shown out of a temple. The lioness to her right paced beside her, matching her stride perfectly, her flank inches from Amora's hip. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As she neared the tree line, Amora caught sight of her camera bag, somehow still there, half buried in the wet grass. Her drone case sat a few feet away, miraculously intact. She reached them, slowly kneeling to retrieve her gear. When she stood again, the pride had stopped. They formed a loose arc at the edge of the open ground, watching, waiting. The cub, now dozing between 2 lionesses, stirred slightly and blinked at her with soft, amber eyes. Amora placed a hand on her chest, breath-catching. "Thank you," she whispered. The matriarch tilted her head, almost imperceptibly. Then she turned. And the pride began to leave, slipping silently into the bush like shadows dissolving into smoke. No roars. No calls. Just paws against wet grass and the rustle of low trees as they vanished back into the wild. Amora raised her hand in a slow wave. Then it was gone. And she was alone again. Except now, the Mara didn't feel like it was pushing her out. It felt like it had opened a door, just briefly, and allowed her to step through something sacred. Amora stood motionless for a long time, unsure if her feet were rooted to the earth or if her soul simply refused to move. The canopy above swayed gently with the wind, the sky a soft grey dome. In the distance, birds began to call again, tentative, as if asking the Mara for permission to speak. Then the realization hit her like the log in the river had earlier. Her camera was still rolling. The backup lens, the one she'd mounted on a motion sensor rig for time-lapse river footage, was still there, pointed toward the bend. She lunged for it. Her fingers trembled as she powered it down and began scrolling through the last hour of footage. There it was. Blurry at first, as the mist still hung low. Then shapes, lion-shaped, emerging. Amora holding the cub. The pride approaching. Her kneeling. The bow. The forehead touch. The escort. She slapped a hand over her mouth as her throat tightened. It wasn't just a story now. It wasn't just a feeling she might one day try to explain with trembling words. It was real. And she had proof. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice she hadn't heard since childhood whispered, "No one's going to believe this." But another voice, the one shaped by years of dust, lens scratches, and long silent waits in wildlife blinds, whispered back. "They don't have to. The lions already did." She tucked her camera into her bag, sealed everything, and began the long hike back to the research camp.